Steve Kazimmer Photo, and this is my garage. I realized recently there's a lot of confusion among many photographers, not all, but some of them, about print sizes, DPI, pixel ratios, that sort of thing. In this video, I'm going to try and clear some of that up, hopefully help some of you out. Quick note just before I get started, all this video I'm going to be referring to the imperial method of measurements, effectively inches for print size and stuff. This seems to be the standard. Unfortunately, I don't know why that's the standard these days. Virtually every country in the world is on the metric system. And in fact, I think there's only 3 countries in the world that are still on the imperial system. Liberia, Myanmar, and third country I can't quite, it's not coming to my mind at the moment. You can look it up. 3 countries in the entire world are still in the imperial system. 3 out of 195. Go figure. Anyways, moving on. So the best place to talk about pixels and aspect ratios and cropping is up at the computer. So let's head up there now. All right, here we are up on the computer, and we're talking about pictures. And what are pictures made of? Pictures are made of pixels. Everybody talks about pixels, megapixels, but what is a pixel? Well, let's find out here. Really, a pixel is just a dot. Usually a square dot. You could think of it a round dot, but let's go with square for now. It wasn't always square, but again, let's assume square for now, because that's pretty much what all cameras have now. Simple square dot. Now, each dot, each pixel, has 3 color channels, RGB, red, green, and blue, which we're all familiar with. And we can adjust the amount of each of these colors to be mixed together to get the final pixel color. Mathematically, this makes perfect sense. It gets you all colors, but it's not intuitive to most humans. Therefore, we can convert these 3 channels into 3 different properties that end up with the same results, and thus is more intuitive to humans. Okay, let's say this dot has 3 fundamental properties: brightness, color, and saturation. It can be any brightness, pure black, all the way to pure white. Also, this dot could be any color: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, Roy G. Biv. Finally, this dot can have any saturation level. This one's a little bit more tricky and maybe not quite as intuitive as the other, but it means how, when you say something's red, how red is it? How much color is in it? Is it just a hint of red? Or is it really red, like this? Now we can combine the 3 parameters and you can get any color your eye can detect. Actually, almost every color, but that's a whole different video. Some of you may have noticed that these properties of a pixel are the same ones in the color picker in Photoshop. It'll be very similar in other photo editing software. Moving up and down will increase or decrease the brightness. Moving right and left will increase or decrease the saturation. And moving up and down on this bar to the right will change the color. As you're selecting in these areas, you can always see the resulting values for the red, green, and blue channels, or the equivalent brightness, color, and saturation values. All right, so now we know what a pixel is and how to define it. 1 pixel is interesting, but doesn't really make a picture, does it? So let's start adding a few more pixels. What if we add a few more dots? 4 pixels. Now we have a 4 pixel camera. Now let's add some more. 16, 64, 256 pixels, 1024 pixels, 4000 pixels. Now it starts to get a little bit interesting. 16,000, 64,000. Now you can actually start to see an image here. 256,000, 1 million pixels. This is a 1 megapixel image. Not bad, eh? Do you still think you need 50 megapixels in your camera? So now you know what a pixel is and what a megapixel is. 1 megapixel is just an array of 1 million pixels. This image has the same number of horizontal pixels and vertical pixels, about 1,000 on a side, and so the result is 1 square, 1 megapixel image. This is about a high resolution that can be displayed on an HD screen, which is limited to 1920 pixels wide and 1080 pixels high. To get into the details a little, this image is actually 1024 by 1024, just a little more than a million pixels. Is this exactly 1 megapixel or a bit more than 1 megapixel? Should we be using 1000, an even number that humans like, or 1024, which is a power of 2, which is what computers like? 1024 versus 1000. Is a megapixel 1 million exactly, or 1,048,576? And what about a 4K HD screen? It is 3,840 pixels wide by 2,160 pixels. double that of a normal HD in both dimensions. That's 8,294,400 pixels, roughly 8 megapixels depending on how you count it. Where does the 4K come in? Do they round up the 3,840 wide to 4K? Are they calling a normal HD screen 1K from the vertical 1080 pixels? And since this is 4 times the resolution, they call it 4K? What kind of logic is this? Sorry, moving on. Of course, an image doesn't need to have the same number of pixels on both sides. My Fuji X-H1 is a 24 megapixel camera, and images are natively 6,000 pixels by 4,000 pixels. What do you get when you multiply 6,000 by 4,000? Why, 24 million, of course. That's why it's called a 24 megapixel camera, in human-friendly megapixels. More pixels on the horizontal than the vertical, and you get a landscape image. It doesn't actually have to be a picture of a landscape, it's just the name for an image with this orientation. Or you could have more pixels vertically than you do horizontally. Then you get a portrait image. This is what you get when you rotate your camera 90 degrees. Of course, these dimensions can be anything. You can have really wide images, like a panorama, or really tall images. This all leads us to the aspect ratio. So what is an aspect ratio and why do I care? Well, the first answer is easy. The aspect ratio is simply the ratio of one side to the other, width divided by height. A perfectly square image has an aspect ratio of 1, since the height and width are equal. The image straight out of my camera is 6,000 wide and 4,000 high. This gives an aspect ratio of 6,000 divided by 4,000, 1.5. The tricky bit about aspect ratios is that they are typically quoted as the long side divided by the short side. So if your image is in portrait orientation, then the aspect ratio is the height divided by the width. If your image is landscape, then the aspect ratio is the width divided by the height. I personally disagree with this approach, and there may be some places where they don't do this. If it was always defined as height divided by width, just like in grade 8 geometry for the slope of a line is always rise over the run, then landscapes would have an aspect ratio of less than 1, square images would have an aspect ratio equal to 1, and portrait images would have an aspect ratio greater than 1. Seems to make sense. But I found that people don't really do this. Just how convention is, I suppose. Here are some common aspect ratios. Camera sensors. Fuji X-H1 has an aspect ratio of 1.5. A Micro Four Thirds camera, hints in the name, has an aspect ratio of 1.333. DVD movies are often 16 by 9, maybe you've seen that before, aspect ratio 1.777. Prints, a 4 by 6 has an aspect ratio of 1.5, which is the same as my camera sensor. What a coincidence. It's also the same as a 2 by 3 inch picture or an 8 inch by 12 inch picture. Common 8 by 10 aspect ratio is 1.25. 11 by 14 inch aspect ratio 1.2727. An HD video screen, 1920 by 1080, same as a 16 by 9, same as DVDs. What a coincidence. Not. 8 by 10 versus 10 by 8, same as the aspect ratio. People always tend to say 8 by 10, quoting the short side first, whether it's a portrait or a landscape. So that is the answer to what is aspect ratio. Now the why do I care part. This really comes into play when you're going to use your image. You have decided to print it, or add it to a web page, or display it on your screen as wallpaper. You take a picture, get back on your PC, and maybe you do some editing, adjusting the exposure, bringing up the shadows, reducing noise, etc. You also may want to crop your image. From a purely artistic point of view, the aspect ratio you end up with could be anything. It doesn't need to be one of the ones listed previously. You can choose to crop your image in any way you want. How about a panorama? Or maybe a vertical banner? Anything is possible, just depends on what you want to do with it. For example, here's a square image, aspect ratio equals 1. And now you want to print your image at London Drugs, Costco, Walmart, any one of the hundreds of places you can order prints from. What happens when you send your square image that has an aspect ratio of 1 to be printed on a 4 by 6, which has an aspect ratio of 1.5? Well, if you send it as is, you will likely end up with this. Not quite what you expected. The top and the bottom will get cropped off. Likewise, what if you wanted to print your panorama image, aspect ratio 2.3, on a 4.6? Then you will end up with this. And the right and left will get cropped off. Generally, when they print, they will fill the frame. So if your aspect ratio doesn't match the aspect ratio of your print size, you will lose some of your image to cropping. Okay, this video is getting way too long, so I'm back down here in the garage, See, here's some wood here from another project of mine, arcade machine I'm building. Make sure you hit subscribe, and then you can see what happens with the arcade machine. And I'll be making a part 2 of this video. I've got a few more topics to cover here. Didn't want the video to get too long and bore you too much. Printing odd aspect ratios, DPI, print sizes, JPEGs, file sizes, that sort of thing. We'll be covered in the next video. So come on back, hope to see you then.